Sarah Mitchell had always been a dog person. At 73 years old, she lived alone in a small house on Maple Street with her golden retriever, Max. The two had been inseparable for 8 years, ever since she found him as a scared puppy at the local animal shelter. Max was more than just a pet to Sarah. He was her companion, her walking buddy, and her reason to get up every morning. Sarah's days followed a simple routine. She would wake up at 6 in the morning and Max would already be sitting by her bed, tail wagging with excitement. They would go for their morning walk around the neighborhood, with Max stopping to sniff every tree and Sarah greeting the neighbors she had known for decades. After breakfast, Max would lie at her feet while she read the newspaper, his warm presence bringing her comfort. But everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Sarah woke up feeling dizzy and weak. When she tried to stand up from her bed, her legs gave out and she collapsed on the floor. Max immediately rushed to her side, whimpering and nudging her with his nose. Sarah managed to reach for her phone and call 911, her voice shaky and scared. The paramedics arrived within minutes and found Sarah conscious but struggling to breathe. Max refused to leave her side, even when the medical team tried to move him away. One of the paramedics, a kind man named Robert, gently held Max while they loaded Sarah onto a stretcher. As the ambulance doors closed, Sarah could see Max's confused face through the window, and her heart broke knowing she was leaving him behind. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Sarah had suffered a severe heart attack. The damage to her heart was significant and her condition was critical. Dr. Martinez, her cardiologist, spoke to her with gentle honesty. Sarah's heart was failing, and despite their best efforts with medications and treatments, her time was limited. The news hit Sarah like a wave of cold water, but her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about Max, Sarah's neighbor. Mrs. Johnson had been taking care of Max since the ambulance took Sarah away. Every day, Mrs. Johnson would call the hospital to give Sarah updates about her beloved dog. Max wasn't eating properly, she reported. He spent most of his time lying by the front door waiting for Sarah to come home. Sometimes Mrs. Johnson would find him sitting by Sarah's bedroom window, looking out at the street with hopeful eyes. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's condition slowly worsened. The doctors tried different treatments, but her heart continued to weaken. She spent most of her time sleeping, connected to machines that monitored her vital signs. The beeping sounds of the hospital equipment became the soundtrack of her days, replacing the happy sounds of Max's barking and playing that she missed so desperately. Sarah had one daughter, Lisa, who lived 3 states away. Lisa came to visit as soon as she heard about her mother's condition, but she could only stay for a few days because of her work commitments. During her visit, Lisa and Sarah had difficult conversations about end of life, decisions, and what would happen to Max. Sarah made Lisa promise that Max would go to a good home where he would be loved and cared for properly. The hardest part for Sarah wasn't the physical pain or the fear of dying. It was the thought of Max waiting for her at home, not understanding why she never came back. She had nightmares about him sitting by the door forever, wondering if she had abandoned him. The nurses noticed how often Sarah talked about her dog, and how her eyes would light up whenever Mrs. Johnson called with updates about him. 3 weeks after her heart attack, Sarah's doctor delivered more bad news. Her heart was failing faster than expected, and she probably had only days left to live. Sarah felt a deep sadness wash over her. Not for herself, but for the faithful companion who would never understand why she had to leave him. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, asking for just one more chance to see Max and say goodbye to the dog who had given her 8 years of unconditional love and friendship. Meanwhile, back at Sarah's house, Max was experiencing his own kind of heartbreak. Mrs. Johnson did her best to care for him, bringing him food and taking him for short walks, but nothing felt right to the confused dog. He had never been separated from Sarah for more than a few hours, and now she had been gone for weeks without any explanation he could understand. Max's behavior became increasingly concerning. He would bark at every car that passed by, hoping it might be Sarah coming home. He refused to sleep in his usual spot by the fireplace, instead choosing to lie on Sarah's bed, surrounded by her scent. Mrs. Johnson found him there every morning, his golden fur covering Sarah's pillow, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed almost human. The most heartbreaking moment came when Mrs. Johnson tried to give Max his favorite treats, the same ones Sarah used to give him every evening after dinner. Max sniffed them once and walked away uninterested. It was as if he had lost his appetite for everything that reminded him of his missing companion. Mrs. Johnson called the vet, worried that Max might be getting sick, but Dr. Peterson explained that dogs can experience depression and grief just like humans do. At the hospital, Sarah was growing weaker each day. The nurses had become attached to her gentle spirit and her constant worry about Max. Nurse Patricia, who worked the night shift, would often sit with Sarah during the quiet hours and listen to her tell stories about Max's silly habits and the adventures they had shared. Sarah would describe how Max used to steal socks from the laundry basket and hide them under the couch, or how he would dance on his hind legs whenever she opened a can of his food. One evening, Nurse Patricia had an idea that seemed crazy, but felt right in her heart. She had been working at Mercy General Hospital for 15 years, and she had seen many patients spend their final days alone, filled with regret about things left unsaid or undone. Sarah's love for Max was so pure and strong that Patricia couldn't bear to watch her suffer, with the thought of never seeing him again. Patricia approached Dr. Martinez with her unusual request. She wanted to know if there was any way Max could visit Sarah in the hospital. Dr. Martinez initially shook his head, explaining the strict hospital policies about animals and the infection control protocols that prevented pets from entering patient rooms. But Patricia was persistent, and she had allies among the nursing staff who had also been touched by Sarah's story. The idea began to spread through the hospital like a warm whisper. Other nurses, doctors, and even hospital administrators started to hear about the elderly woman who was dying while worrying about her faithful dog. Some staff members shared their own stories about beloved pets and how important these animals had been during difficult times in their lives. The human-animal bond was something that transcended medical protocols and hospital rules. Dr. Martinez found himself thinking about Patricia's request more than he expected. He had always been a practical man who followed rules and regulations without question. But something about Sarah's situation touched a part of his heart that he usually kept protected in his professional life. He began to research if there were any exceptions to the hospital's pet policy, any precedents that might allow for a special circumstance like this one. To everyone's surprise, Dr. Martinez discovered that the hospital did have a provision for therapy animals in certain situations. While Max wasn't officially a therapy dog, the intent of the policy was to provide comfort to patients in their time of greatest need. After several meetings with hospital administration and infection control specialists, a plan began to take shape that might make the impossible possible. The conditions would be strict. Max would need to be examined by a veterinarian and certified as healthy. He would need to be bathed and groomed according to hospital standards. The visit would have to be brief and only essential staff members could be present. Sarah's room would need special cleaning before and after the visit. But most importantly, Sarah would need to understand that this might be her final goodbye to Max. When Nurse Patricia told Sarah about the possibility of seeing Max, the elderly woman began to cry tears of joy and disbelief. She had given up hope of ever seeing her beloved companion again, and now the hospital staff was working to make a miracle happen. Sarah spent the next day preparing herself emotionally for what she knew would be the most difficult and most precious moments of her remaining life. Mrs. Johnson received the phone call from the hospital with complete shock. When Nurse Patricia explained that they wanted to bring Max to visit Sarah, Mrs. Johnson thought it must be some kind of mistake. She had never heard of a dog being allowed inside a hospital, especially not in a patient's room. But as Patricia explained the careful planning and special arrangements being made, Mrs. Johnson realized that something extraordinary was about to happen. The preparation for Max's visit became a community effort. Mrs. Johnson took Max to the veterinary clinic where Dr. Peterson performed a thorough health examination. Max needed to be completely free of any parasites, infections, or health issues that could pose a risk to other patients in the hospital. Dr. Peterson, who had known Max since he was a puppy, was amazed by the unusual request but happy to help make it possible. Max seemed to sense that something important was happening. During his examination, he was calmer than usual, as if he understood that this process was somehow connected to finding Sarah. Dr. Peterson noted that despite Max's recent depression and loss of appetite, he was physically healthy and cleared him for the hospital visit. The vet even donated a special antibacterial shampoo to ensure Max would meet the hospital's cleanliness standards. The grooming process took place at a professional pet salon, where the staff volunteered their time free of charge after hearing Max's story. They bathed him with the special shampoo, trimmed his nails, and brushed his golden fur until it shined like silk. Max tolerated all the attention patiently, though he kept looking toward the door as if hoping Sarah might walk in at any moment. Back at the hospital, the staff was making their own preparations. Sarah's room was deep cleaned and sanitized according to the strictest protocols. Special air filters were installed, and the infection control team created a detailed plan for before, during, and after the visit. Word of the upcoming reunion had spread throughout the hospital, and many staff members were volunteering to help in any way they could. Sarah spent hours thinking about what she wanted to say to Max during their brief time together. She knew he wouldn't understand her words, but she hoped he would feel her love and somehow know that she wasn't abandoning him by choice. She practiced speaking to him in her mind, telling him what a good boy he had been and how much joy he had brought to her life. Most importantly, she wanted to help him understand that it was okay to be happy with a new family when she was gone. The emotional weight of the situation wasn't lost on the hospital staff. Many of them had pets of their own, and they understood the deep bond between Sarah and Max. Nurse Patricia found herself thinking about her own elderly cat at home and how devastated she would be if they were separated during her final days. The upcoming visit had touched something universal about love, loyalty, and the connections that make life meaningful. On the morning of the scheduled visit, Sarah woke up with more energy than she had felt in weeks. The nurses noticed that her vital signs were more stable, and there was a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She asked for help fixing her hair and putting on her favorite sweater, the blue one that Max always loved to nuzzle against during their quiet evening moments together. Dr. Martinez made one final check of all the preparations. He reviewed the safety protocols with his team and confirmed that everyone understood their roles during the visit. Despite his initial concerns about breaking hospital policy, he now felt proud to be part of something that demonstrated the healing power of love and compassion. He had seen many medical miracles during his career, but this felt different. This was about the medicine of the heart. As the appointed time approached, a nervous excitement filled the hospital floor. The other patients had heard whispers about what was going to happen, and many of them were rooting for Sarah and Max. Some patients who were able to walk gathered in the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of the reunion. The maintenance staff had even polished the floors extra carefully, wanting everything to be perfect for this special moment. Mrs. Johnson arrived at the hospital with Max on a brand new leash, both of them nervous but hopeful. Max seemed confused by the unfamiliar surroundings and the strange smells of the hospital, but his tail wagged slightly when he heard Mrs. Johnson mention Sarah's name. He didn't fully understand where they were going, but somewhere deep in his canine intuition, he sensed that this journey might finally lead him back to the person he loved most in the world. The moment Max stepped off the elevator onto Sarah's floor, something extraordinary happened. Despite never having been in a hospital before, Max's behavior changed completely. His ears perked up, his tail began wagging faster, and he started pulling gently toward Sarah's room as if he could sense her presence through the walls. Mrs. Johnson was amazed. It was as if Max had suddenly come alive after weeks of sadness and confusion. Nurse Patricia met them at the elevator and couldn't help but smile at Max's obvious excitement. She had seen many emotional moments during her nursing career, but there was something magical about watching a dog's instincts guide him toward his beloved owner. Max looked up at Patricia with bright, intelligent eyes, and for a moment, she could swear he understood that she was helping him reach Sarah. As they walked down the hallway toward room 237, Max's excitement grew with each step. Other hospital staff members stopped what they were doing to watch the golden retriever trot confidently down the corridor, his freshly groomed fur catching the fluorescent lights. Some nurses wiped away tears thinking about their own pets at home and the unconditional love that animals bring to human lives. Dr. Martinez was waiting outside Sarah's room, and he knelt down to let Max sniff his hand. Max gave the doctor's fingers a quick lick, then immediately turned his attention back to the door where his owner waited. The doctor was struck by how calm and well-behaved Max was, despite being in such an unfamiliar and overwhelming environment. It was clear that this dog had been raised with love and proper training. Inside the room, Sarah heard Max's distinctive footsteps in the hallway, the same sounds that had greeted her every morning for 8 years. Her heart began beating faster, and for the first time in weeks she felt truly alive. She tried to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, wanting to look her best for the reunion she had dreamed about during countless sleepless nights. When the door finally opened and Max bounded into the room, time seemed to stop for everyone present. Max froze for just a moment as if he couldn't believe his eyes, then rushed to Sarah's bedside with a joy that was almost overwhelming to witness. He placed his front paws on the edge of her bed and stretched his neck to reach her face, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook with happiness. Sarah burst into tears of pure joy as Max covered her face with gentle kisses. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his soft, clean fur, breathing in his familiar scent and feeling his warm, solid presence against her weak body. For both of them, it was as if the terrible weeks of separation had never happened. They were simply together again, which was all that mattered in the world. The hospital staff who witnessed the reunion found themselves crying along with Sarah. Even Dr. Martinez, who prided himself on maintaining professional composure, had to wipe his eyes as he watched the pure love between woman and dog. Nurse Patricia quietly stepped closer to adjust Sarah's blankets, and Max immediately acknowledged her with a grateful look, as if he understood that she had helped make this miracle possible. Max seemed to instinctively understand that Sarah was fragile and sick. Instead of his usual enthusiastic jumping and playing, he gently laid his head on her chest and settled into a calm, protective position beside her bed. Sarah stroked his ears and whispered all the things she had been saving up to tell him. How much she missed him, how sorry she was for leaving him, and how proud she was of what a good boy he had been. As the minutes passed, something beautiful happened. Sarah's breathing became easier, her color improved, and her vital signs stabilized in a way that amazed the medical staff. Dr. Martinez quietly checked her monitors and was astonished to see that her heart rate had normalized and her blood pressure had dropped to healthier levels. The presence of her beloved dog was providing better medicine than any drug in the hospital pharmacy. Max seemed content to simply be near Sarah, occasionally lifting his head to look at her face or to gently lick her hand. He showed no interest in exploring the room or investigating the strange medical equipment. His entire focus was on his owner, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of her face and store up enough love to last forever. The planned 15-minute visit stretched to 30 minutes, then 45 as the medical staff realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah was more alert and responsive than she had been in days, and Max was providing a comfort that no amount of medical intervention could match. Dr. Martinez made the decision to extend the visit, knowing that this might be the most important medicine Sarah could receive. After 2 hours of being reunited with Max, Sarah began to feel tired, but it was a peaceful tiredness rather than the exhausted weakness she had experienced for weeks. Max seemed to sense her fatigue and adjusted his position to make her more comfortable, moving his head from her chest to rest gently beside her arm. His warm presence continued to provide comfort, even as Sarah's energy began to fade. Dr. Martinez quietly approached the bed to check on Sarah's condition. He was amazed to find that despite her obvious emotional exhaustion from the intense reunion, her vital signs remained more stable than they had been since her arrival at the hospital. Max looked up at the doctor with trusting eyes, as if he understood that this man was taking care of his beloved owner. Sarah knew that the visit would have to end soon, and the thought of saying goodbye to Max again filled her with dread. But something had changed during their time together. She had been able to tell him everything she needed him to know, and more importantly, she could see in his eyes that he understood she loved him completely. The desperate anxiety she had felt about leaving him behind had been replaced by a peaceful acceptance. Nurse Patricia approached the bed with tears in her eyes. She had been so moved by the reunion that she had made a decision that went far beyond her nursing duties. She knelt down beside Max and spoke softly to Sarah about an idea that had been forming in her mind throughout the visit. Patricia had a large backyard and had recently lost her own elderly dog. She wondered if Sarah would consider allowing her to adopt Max when the time came. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. She had been tormented by worries about Max's future, and now this angel of a nurse was offering to give him a loving home. Patricia explained that she lived only a few miles from Sarah's neighborhood, so Max could even visit his familiar walking routes and see Mrs. Johnson regularly. It was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. Max seemed to approve of Patricia as well. When she reached out to pet him, he leaned into her touch and gave her hand a gentle lick. Sarah watched this interaction with wonder, feeling as if fate had brought exactly the right person into their lives at exactly the right moment. She asked Patricia about her home, her experience with dogs, and her daily schedule, and every answer confirmed that this was meant to be. As the extended visit finally came to an end, Sarah had one last important conversation with Max. She held his face in her hands and looked directly into his intelligent brown eyes. She told him that Patricia was going to be his new family, and that it was okay for him to love her and be happy with her. She explained that sometimes people have to go away, but love never goes away, and she would always be watching over him from wherever she went next. Max tilted his head as Sarah spoke, listening intently to her voice even though he couldn't understand her words. But dogs are remarkably intuitive creatures, and something in Sarah's tone and energy seemed to communicate what she needed him to know. He licked her face one more time, then surprised everyone by walking over to Patricia and sitting calmly beside her, as if he was ready to accept his new guardian. The goodbye was heartbreaking but somehow peaceful. Sarah kissed the top of Max's head and whispered "good boy" one final time. Max wagged his tail and gave her one last loving look before allowing Patricia to lead him toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Sarah, and she waved at him with a smile that was both sad and grateful. Mrs. Johnson was waiting in the hallway, and she was amazed by the transformation in Max's demeanor. The depressed, listless dog she had been caring for was gone, replaced by the alert, confident companion she remembered from happier times. Max greeted Mrs. Johnson with affection, but his attention remained focused on Patricia, as if he understood that his future lay with this kind nurse who had helped reunite him with Sarah. As Patricia, Mrs. Johnson, and Max made their way back down the hospital corridor, staff members stopped to say goodbye to the dog who had brought so much joy to their workplace. Max walked proudly between his escorts, his tail high and his spirit restored. He had found Sarah, said his goodbyes, and now he was ready to begin the next chapter of his life with confidence and hope. Back in room 237, Sarah lay in her bed with a sense of completion she hadn't felt since her heart attack. She had been granted the impossible gift of seeing Max one more time, and even better, she had been able to ensure his future happiness. The terrible anxiety that had been eating away at her for weeks was finally gone, replaced by a deep peace that settled over her like a warm blanket. Sarah passed away peacefully 3 days after her reunion with Max. Her final days were marked by a serenity that amazed the hospital staff who had watched her struggle with anxiety and grief for weeks. She spoke often about how grateful she was for the gift of seeing Max one more time, and how much comfort it brought her to know he would be loved and cared for by Patricia. Her last words to Nurse Patricia were simply, "Thank you for giving me peace." The funeral service was small but meaningful, attended by neighbors who had known Sarah for decades, hospital staff who had been touched by her story, and of course, Patricia and Max. The golden retriever wore a black ribbon around his collar and seemed to understand the solemnity of the occasion. He sat quietly beside Patricia throughout the service, occasionally looking toward Sarah's casket as if he knew she was there one final time. Patricia had kept her promise to give Max a loving home. In the weeks following Sarah's death, she marveled at how quickly Max adapted to his new life. He seemed to understand that Sarah was gone, but rather than falling back into depression, he embraced his new routine with Patricia. He had his own bed beside Patricia's, a spacious backyard to play in, and regular visits from Mrs. Johnson, who remained an important part of his extended family. The story of Max's hospital visit spread far beyond Mercy General. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon people from across the country were calling to express their support for the hospital's compassionate decision. The administration received hundreds of letters praising the staff for recognizing that healing involves more than just medical treatment. The story touched people because it reminded them of the powerful bonds between humans and animals, and the importance of love in the healing process. Dr. Martinez was so moved by the experience that he worked with hospital administration to create a formal pet visitation program for terminally ill patients. The program established clear protocols for allowing beloved pets to visit their owners during their final days, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to endure the separation that had caused Sarah so much anguish. The program was named Sarah's Gift, in honor of the woman whose love for her dog had opened everyone's eyes to the healing power of these special relationships. Max thrived in his new home with Patricia. She discovered that he had a playful side that had been hidden during his weeks of mourning for Sarah. He loved chasing tennis balls in the backyard, playing tug-of-war with rope toys, and learning new tricks. Patricia was amazed by his intelligence and his eagerness to please, qualities that Sarah had clearly nurtured during their years together. Max brought joy and companionship to Patricia's life in ways she hadn't expected, and she often felt that Sarah had given her a precious gift along with the responsibility of caring for Max. On weekends, Patricia would take Max back to his old neighborhood for walks. He would visit Mrs. Johnson, who always had treats waiting for him, and he would walk past Sarah's house, sometimes stopping to look at the front door where he had once waited so hopefully for her return. But these visits didn't make him sad. Instead, they seemed to bring him a sense of closure and connection to his past life with Sarah. The most remarkable thing about Max's transformation was how he seemed to carry forward the love and training that Sarah had given him. He was gentle with children, friendly with other dogs, and protective of Patricia in the same way he had been devoted to Sarah. It was as if Sarah's love had become part of his character, something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. A year after Sarah's death, Patricia received a surprise visitor. Sarah's daughter Lisa had driven from 3 states away to meet the woman who had adopted her mother's beloved dog. Lisa was amazed by how happy and healthy Max looked, and how clearly he was loved in his new home. She thanked Patricia for keeping the promise she had made to a dying woman, and for proving that sometimes strangers can become family when brought together by love and compassion. The story of Sarah and Max became a legend at Mercy General Hospital. New staff members would hear about the dog who visited his dying owner and the nurse who opened her heart to adopt him. The tale served as a reminder that medicine is about more than treating diseases. It's about treating whole human beings with all their loves, fears, and relationships. Sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from medications or procedures, but from ensuring that love has a chance to say goodbye. Max lived for 6 more happy years with Patricia, reaching the respectable age of 14 before peacefully passing away in his sleep. On his collar that final day was a small engraved tag that read, "Sarah's good boy," a reminder of the woman who had loved him first and the incredible journey that had brought him to Patricia's loving home. His story continued to inspire the hospital's pet visitation program, which helped dozens of other families say goodbye to their beloved animal companions, ensuring that Sarah's legacy of love would continue to bring comfort to others for years to come.